Welcome back to Sustainability Forward. I'm Rishi, and with me is my co-host Carmine. So Carmine, before we jump into today's episode, I think we have a very interesting recent development that caught our eye, and that's very pertinent to the topic of sustainability and communication. Would you introduce the topic to our audience?
Hi, Rishi. Sure. So this is coming from a news that, as you said, we saw a few weeks back. It is about Unilever. They announced that they're merging its sustainability and external communication teams, a move that reflects how companies are rethinking the role of sustainability with a broader business strategy.
Yeah, when I read this article a few weeks ago, my understanding was that their leadership wanted to better integrate sustainability into the company's overall messaging and decision-making process. So essentially treating it less as a standalone function, which it was prior to this announcement, and more as a core part of how the business responds to the world or communicates to the world. That was kind of my take on it.
Yeah, it's an interesting shift, especially as a more organizational grapple with how to talk about sustainability in a way that is both credible and aligned with the business goals.
Exactly. And in terms of our episode today, that is exactly where we are headed. We have Helen Neal, who's an expert in sustainability communications and partnerships. She's the founder of HN Communications and works with leading organizations to bring clarity, purpose, and impact to how they communicate sustainability. Carmine, let's maybe give our audience a bit more of a detailed bio for Helen.
Yes, she's the founder. So Helen is the founder of HEINEKEN Communication, a multi-award winning sustainability communication agency. Named Professional of the Year at the 2024 PRCA Dare Award and a speaker at COP16 in Riyadh, Helen is known for helping global businesses integrate sustainability into their strategy. After 14 years in politics and corporate roles, including at the House of Commons, Virgin Atlantic, and Nissan, Helen launched HN Communication to build a more flexible, supportive workplace, especially for women and parents. Her passion lies in bridging the corporate and NGO worlds and providing that sustainability and profitability can go hand in hand. So Helen, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me both. I'm glad to be here.
No, we're very thankful for you joining the episode, Helen. So we've heard a little bit about your current organization, where you came from, but if you don't mind sharing, your journey in your own words for the benefit of our audience, that would be great. Also, if you could link it to how you arrived into the arena of sustainability-focused communications and events.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I started in the world of politics maybe around 25 years ago now. So I worked for some UK politicians, and I guess I was quite intrigued by a career in politics. I think from a view of, I loved the idea of working towards something that had a positive benefit, a positive outcome, that it had some form of meaning to it. And I found it quite interesting, that kind of intersection and the relationship between business and government and how those two worlds can actually be a force for good. I learned a lot from the political side. And I was always interested in the kind of campaigning. So how do you build something? How do you build a concept, a mission for something, and how do you move people from where they are today to something better in the future? And so I think that then precipitated me to go and work in corporate and kind of take that thinking into the corporate world. So I think, as you mentioned, working for Virgin Atlantic and then latterly Nissan, a lot of my role there was to help that global corporate interact with government. And I think we've all seen the murky world of lobbying and politics, and I think sometimes, unfortunately, that does still exist. But I think for the most part, there is a very transparent and open collaboration, and business and government do need to collaborate. It's extremely important. And business needs to make sure that governments understand their needs to formulate policy and vice versa. So it's an interesting balance. It does, and it can be controversial at times. But I think with both Virgin and with Nissan, the point around sustainability just seemed to always follow me. So at Virgin, obviously, from a policy point of view, you can well imagine with deeply polluting aircraft, how do you look at reducing that, and how do you incentivize the industry to decarbonize, and what solutions and innovations exist? So I work quite a lot in that space. And then after that, when I moved to Nissan, my role was to introduce the electric car into the UK and the rest of Europe from a
Was it Leaf?
Leaf, yeah.
Leaf, yeah.
It was Leaf.
Yeah.
And so it's still one of my favorite cars. It means a lot to me, that car, because at the time there was not even regulation to allow the vehicle on the road. So you couldn't actually, even if you bought the electric car into the UK, you were not legally allowed to drive it on the roads. The regulations didn't exist to allow it. So it was that early. And so we did a lot of work to kind of really set the scene for the electric car industry to kind of grow really across Europe. And I'll be honest, a lot of times we kind of got laughed at. People thought it was a ridiculous idea and kind of likened them to ice cream vans and milk floats and that kind of thing. So it is wonderful, however, to see how the world has changed. Probably not as quick and as fast as we would have liked back then, but progress has been made, and it is great to see that those cars are now part of the general ecosystem. So I think sustainability always followed me. And it is, again, I think going back to that point earlier, this thing that drives me personally, and I think it's all important we have our purpose in work, but I'm particularly interested in how we move people from A to B, to get to a more positive outcome. I think that is a big motivator for me, and obviously sustainability sits really well within that concept. So I left Nissan and decided to set up, initially freelanced and consulted, but as time grew on, we got more and more projects. I brought more and more people onto the team. It was before COVID, but flexible working was deeply important to me, having worked in a fairly rigid structure for so long. We're a very creative business, and I feel that we need that freedom and flexibility to bring our best creative selves to bear. So that's very much the philosophy of our business. And over time, we've built it up to, work with some of the world's kind of biggest global brands, doing some great work in sustainability. And I guess I'm really focused and passionate about helping those businesses gain the confidence to communicate on the work that they're doing on sustainability. And that doesn't always mean about just sharing the positive. And that's why I say confidence is helping those brands to talk about the difficulty as well, and feeling confident about that, because that's exceptionally important when we talk about sustainability comms, which I'm sure we'll come on to in a second. So that's me in a nutshell, really.
Thank you, Helen. And so we understood why then clear communication is critical to sustainability success. Now, based on your experience, can you help us to understand what are the common mistakes that companies make when communicating sustainability? And on the other side, also, what are the best practices that you experience?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, actually, because I genuinely believe that most businesses out there want to do the right thing. I think that those often that greenwash or get caught up in greenwashing have done so unintentionally. And I think that's part of the fear of why they then don't communicate after that. They've been burned badly and they're not quite sure why it's happened. I think one of the challenges is that the way in which corporates traditionally talk about themselves is always to put their best foot forward. Everything, and there's nothing wrong with that. They are a business, they're there to sell their products. So this is always about how do we put ourselves in the best light, show the positive angle, and that's completely fine when you're looking at selling a service or product. But it's not fine. In fact, it's quite dangerous when you look to try and take that principle of communication into the world of sustainability. Why? Because when you just speak about the positive, when you just focus on half of the story without the wider context, this is where you start to become very quickly embroiled in potential greenwashing. So I think the very nature of how businesses have traditionally communicated hasn't caught up with the need of how you need to very specifically talk about sustainability in a different way. So I think that is often, time and time again, we see a problem happening with a lot of the corporates. So I think there's a space there for education and support around how you communicate better and what does best practice look like. I think that one is obviously, as I mentioned before, this need to talk about the whole picture and get comfortable and confident with telling the whole journey. We have found that consumers react far better and positively and favor that brand when the brand is very open about challenges and difficulty as much as the success. And so I think for brands, they need to think about, we need to have a roadmap of how we're going to get to net zero. And we need to work consistently towards that roadmap, but be honest that they don't necessarily have all the answers, because the reality is no business has all the answers of how they're going to get there. So being honest about that, but show the areas of where you're trying. And I think one of the things that we've learned, because we work very closely with the NGO world, and I think they do it exceptionally well. So if any business is looking at how to do this really well, go and look at how NGOs talk about sustainability. They do so in a method of which to, not to sell because they're not selling anything, but to help educate, share learning, spotlight where things are working and where things aren't. And I think it's, if you can take that more approach as a way to communicate, as a method to share learning, share growth, share the difficulty, that enables all businesses to build on that information, take that into their own organizations and learn from it. So I think it's a different angle, it's a different approach. So those are the things that we often try to get businesses to start to feel comfortable with.
That's very good, Helen. Gives us particularly comparison with how NGOs do it. I think you're right, there's probably something to be learned from that space. One question that I sort of find myself thinking about, particularly in light of what's happening in geopolitics or in recent times, is in the past few years, did you get the feeling that we had kind of separated profits and sustainability was being talked about only in sort of an altruistic sense, right? Which is fine, because it does, the goal is to do good for the world, but then if you kind of divorce it from shareholders' interest, that could have its own backlash. Some of it, I think, is coming through as well, probably a bit more than it should. Do you share that concern as well?
I think that's a really great question. I think that, and I will put our own hands up here, that the communications industry, I think, have done a disservice to the sustainability narrative. And me and my business, we're all part of this world. I think what I reflect on is that in the past few years, I think, like you identified, the story and the narrative has been very much that altruistic goal of, it's important that we all do our thing to support the planet, make sure that we get to net zero and protect our world. And that doesn't mean to say that that is not untrue. It absolutely is true. And I think that probably has resonated with 50% of that audience. But we have neglected the other 50%. And I think this is why sustainability has remained a challenge. And now we have these additional challenges on top of what we've been facing with different political trajectories now that we're all kind of part of. I think we've done a disservice to the storytelling, because I think that we haven't spoken about it in boardroom speak. Now, wherever your political view might be as of today, I do wonder whether the way in which we are being pushed down a particular avenue with global politics right now, could this actually potentially be a benefit longer term for how we communicate on sustainability? Because I think we need to do a lot more in talking about how sustainability is a business benefit, how it decreases risk, how it can speak more to the CFOs and the wider board to make good financial long-term business sense. And that is what we haven't done very well to this point. So I think what we're doing, and I think what we will see in the coming years, is that there will be a shift around, yes, that original storyline is absolutely true and still needs to be part there. But we now need to bolster that with facts, data, and kind of credible evidence to show that this is good business practice, because it is. But we need to get that data clearly in front of those decision makers so that we keep going on that journey. So I think that's something that I'm very mindful of for 2025.
So the business case on sustainability to be built in a quantitative approach. And something, Helen, that you mentioned before on talking about NGOs and what we can learn from that kind of work, different from for a corporate. Can you give us some example or some insight of what has been seen so far?
Yeah, I think one of the things beyond the, like I mentioned earlier, in terms of the approach of their narrative, of how they communicate, and it's very much as a method to share learning, share knowledge, put a spotlight on challenges and difficulties, and provide case studies of what works and what doesn't. I think one of the other special places that NGOs have within this framework is their ability to bring organizations together and build a level of consensus. I think this is very important for one clear reason, in that, as I mentioned earlier, not one organization has all the answers to how they will get to net zero. And in fact, most of them are not quite sure on certain parts. And actually, that's okay. It's okay. Like, we need to be honest so that we can address it. I think what NGOs are great at being able to do, and we should be utilizing them more, is building that level of consensus to allow a safe space for those industries to come together and to share the difficulties. Because quite often what we find is, you may be a food and beverage manufacturer, or an automotive car company, or even an electricity provider. But if you sit them around the table, there will be synergies of challenges that they are all facing, regardless of their industry. So there are a few things in that, being able to bring that world together so that we can find where those shared challenges are. An NGO can help to build the shared solutions to help everyone move forward. And I really feel that for sustainability, it's one of those areas where business must put competition aside. It's not a competitive sport, sustainability. It's a collaborative one. And it's only through that collaborative, collective working together that we get the real kind of outcomes and action. So I think that's an untapped area. I do see businesses starting to do that with some NGOs to some great success. RE100, if on renewable energy, for example, has done a huge amount in this space with big corporates. But I think times are changing, in that, sustainability, as I say, is something to be a collaborative sport. We are no longer in competition. In order for us to all succeed, we have to collaborate together when it comes to sustainability. So getting businesses more comfortable with that idea, I think, is really important.
Basically, also, Ellen, what you're saying is we are leaving on the table the opportunity to capitalize and leverage this lesson learned that are coming from failures, from challenges, from all these kind of experiences.
Yes.
And not really truly democratizing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the challenge there is that at the moment, the way that business has always been is there is a fear there of how much can they share those challenges with one another. So how do you even know that your competitor, or indeed someone from an organization from a completely different industry, are also sharing those challenges? If you were to know where those similar challenges are, there's then becomes opportunity to really crowdsource solutions and invest together. I am starting to see some of that happen. And I think there's some interesting things happening around innovation for sustainability right now, where more and more businesses are coming together to create funds together to say, hey, you know what, we now know that us four drinks manufacturers have the same challenge around recyclability. So we need to find a solution together on that. And so they're now starting to put funds together where they can then put a call out to startups and scale-ups to offer potential solutions and trial those innovations out with the big corporates. And I think this is an interesting trend that I'm seeing growing. So it is starting to happen. But I think, that having the safe space, but the transparent space to be able to communicate and understand where those opportunities are, I think that's where an NGO has a brilliant opportunity to kind of hold that space for those organizations.
Moving from sustainability communication strategy to something that is done on the ground. Example, sustainability events, right? Right, we've Carmen and I have attended a number of events, some small, some really on a grand scale. But from your experience, what goes behind making the sustainability focused events successful and memorable? Some brands are very well known, but sometimes you go to a smaller event and you realize that you either learn a lot, make a lot of connections, but what goes behind kind of planning these events, and how do they become successful?
I think any good sustainability event, I think like all events, it comes down to deciding the kind of core topics that is almost the zeitgeist of the day. What are the real challenges that the organizations and people are facing within this space, and being very attuned to that when you're putting the original structure and the program of the event together. I think once you've done that, it's then about saying, okay, well, who has a real interesting or key opinion in this space on these topics that we can bring to bear? I think it's always important to have a diverse group of perspectives. I think that is important in order to understand the wide scope of the potential challenges and potential solutions. So I think diversity of thought is really important. But I also think having a really good space to ensure that engagement and that networking is happening amongst the people that are coming to the sessions is super important. I think when we're organizing events, we're also always mindful about how to do it sustainably. You can't have a sustainability event. You shouldn't really, any event, but it's about being mindful of how do you do it in a way that is as sustainable as possible, and being mindful throughout that whole journey. Everything down to, how are you sourcing the food? Often when we're doing events, we always try to kind of focus on mostly plant-based food. We like to do that anyway, because we like to kind of challenge the thinking in terms of, what's possible around plant-based food as well. To, even down to the, the plants, and do they get given back, or do you, any waste food, how do you make sure that is passed on to local charities? And a lot of the events that we have done tend to be quite international. We work on things like Climate Week in New York, but we've done other events across the globe. And I think some of the events we've been very proud that we've been able to deliver, but we've done so remotely. And people kind of say, how on earth did you do that? But I think if you've got a strong team, and because we're always remote, we're very good at having systems and processes that are set up for us to be able to do that. And what we tend to do is work with local teams on the ground, who then physically deliver the event whilst we are overseeing and managing the whole concept of the event. And we've been really proud to be able to deliver some events where none of our team members have actually physically been there, but we've been able to successfully deliver events. So it is possible. And I think the events world is kind of ripe for disruption right now. I think some things are happening, but I think, there's a lot of waste and sustainable challenges that come with even putting on an event, let alone asking people to travel. But I also think we have to be practical in that it's so important for that human face-to-face interaction. And if that means that sometimes, deals get done and we make progress because we've seen one another face-to-face, looked each other in the eye, shaked one another's hands and say, yes, we're doing this. I think it's important that we continue to do those events too.
Thank you, Helen.
Absolutely.
And talking about disruption and looking ahead in the next 5-10 years, what do you think could be one of the blind spots or something that probably we are underlooking in this sustainability communication, and something where we should pay more attention, given what we are expecting in the near future?
I mean, I think we've touched on a few things, but I think there's a big challenge with scope 3. So the different levels of emissions that a lot of the bigger businesses need to focus on. And scope 1 and 2 are around the organization's controllable emissions. Scope 3 is much more within that third-party supply chain, who your suppliers are, where they are in the globe, who their suppliers are in this whole value chain of the supply chain in order to kind of build a product. I think this is a great challenge that at the moment some businesses who have accelerated quite well and positively in scope 1 and scope 2 are just dipping their toe into scope 3. I think it's a huge challenge. Not only, as you can imagine, how do you understand the whole value chain, not just of the supplier that you employ, but who they employ, who they employ, who they employ, and what are the standards, not just in terms of CO2, but also in terms of human rights and ethical sourcing and all of how do you understand all of that throughout the whole value chain, I think is deeply complex. And I think also it's a challenge because when you're asking, let's say you're a food producer, but you're asking, a farmer in Indonesia to calculate their carbon emissions, what technology are they going to be able to use that they have to hand in order to be able to calculate that? So I think it's a very complex challenge that hasn't been bottomed out. And I think as we progress, we will unearth probably more challenges within that space. However, in technology, I know we use it as a throwaway term a lot of the time that it will solve all of the issues and problems. But I wonder whether things like obviously AI, but also blockchain is a potential here to kind of help with understanding that supply chain process. One of the clients we've worked with, Peroni actually, did a great piece of work around using blockchain and putting a QR code on its Peroni bottles in Italy, which could show the consumer the whole value chain between farmer up to where it was sold. So I think the technology and trialing these things out is potentially there, but it's about how you then do it on a mass scale. So I think that is a challenge that we're only just dipping our toes into, but I think could unearth more challenges as we go.
Thank you,
That's
Helen.
great. Helen, we are coming to the close of our episode. Before we close it, just wanted to understand if our audience wants to look you up, where they should be looking. We'll obviously post the details on the description as well, but if you could share that now, that'll be great.
Yeah, sure. So I'm on LinkedIn. So Helen Neal, you'll find me on LinkedIn, and I post regularly. But also you can find us on www.heicnekeN.co.uk. And actually on the website, you will find, we also do a little quiz. It's totally free, but you can just fill in, I think there's about 6 or 7 questions, less than a minute. And it's quite fun, but it will also give you some real world feedback tailored to your answers about where you're at in terms of your sustainability communications journey, and perhaps some top tips in terms of what you can easily do just to kind of improve slightly more. It's quite informative, quite tailored, but it might just be helpful if anyone is interested in how they improve their comms. That's a good way to start.
Excellent. So we learned a great deal today, starting with your journey in the murky world of politics to sustainability, and then to becoming an entrepreneur in the world of sustainability communications. We learned a little bit about how to balance success stories with lessons learned, partnership with NGOs, and understanding what they are doing and bring some of those learning points into the corporate world. And then we learned a little bit about sustainability-focused events, which all of us attend. But if you think about them, they have huge potential, but they also then have a responsibility for being sustainable themselves, right? And then I particularly like the comment about Scope 3 because, as we know, Scope 3 can be 10x of Scope 1 and 2, right? So that's a huge challenge. Carmine, what were your takeaways from this?
Really, Richie, I liked the conversation about the lesson learned. And this also iterated the fact that we know another business that is really growth start at the boundary of comfort zones. And probably the sustainability talk also should sustainability should also be in that kind of area. So as Helen was saying, sharing also not just successes but also failures or issues or lesson learned that we take out of this journey.
Absolutely. Helen, thank you again for joining us on this podcast. We'll hope to speak to you at another forum or another episode sometime soon.
I'd love that. Thanks so much for having me both.
So to our audience, you had this great episode just now. We are on various podcast channels such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, not on Google Podcasts because that's gone away now. And on LinkedIn, you can find us under the banner Sustainability Forward. We hope you will like, share this episode. If you have any questions, please share your comments on the LinkedIn platform, and we'll hope to answer them as soon as possible. That's it for now. I'm closing the episode now. This is your host, Rishi, signing it off with my co-host, Carmine.